and welcome to this edition of Islands That Sports Talk. I'm joined by the president of CANOC, Mr. Brian Lewis, in Trinidad and Tobago. You're also the president of Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Association. First of all, Mr. Lewis, it has been a tumultuous time in the Caribbean when it comes to sports, especially at the NOC levels. How have you guys been dealing with just the region and trying to make things happen?
Tremendously difficult. First off, thank you very much for having me on. To you and your listeners or viewers, thank you. It's a pleasure. Let me just take the opportunity. I assume this is Bermuda.
Yes.
So as to say hello to my good friend, but I'd like to believe she's my good friend. The president of the Bermuda Olympic Association, Judy Simmons. So if she's watching your program, Judy, hi, and been tremendously difficult. Sports has shut down. So in terms of Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, where sport is still very much amateur, recreational, and the professional ecosystem in the Caribbean is not as well structured as it could be. So that I've said that the reality is that sport in the Caribbean, there are many national sporting organizations and sports that could get wiped out and wiped off the space of the sporting landscape because of COVID-19.
What do you think is going to be needed to save those ones that you're referring to? Because everything needs financing, but it also needs the ability to have people run it. So what do you think is needed to save those, what we would consider not lesser sports, but the sports that need that extra help?
I think that, to be very honest with you, some sports are not going to make it. Because, as I was saying just this morning on an International Olympic Committee conference with the IOC president, Thomas Bach, and I was saying at the TTOC's Fourth Advancing Women in Leadership Forum on the weekend gone, that COVID-19 is gender regressive. And that a lot of the gains made, not just in sport, but in various sectors of society and life, by gender, going to get rolled back simply because COVID-19, the burden of care. So we see just in numbers in terms of how many people have died, how many people have been infected. But because it's a novel coronavirus, the long-term impact is not certain and established yet.
Right.
And there's a significant cost in terms of care in where people have died. Who picks up the responsibility? And that research is showing across the globe that proportionately that is falling significantly on women, right? And why I say that in answer to your question, so it's not just in terms of women and girls in sport, that a generation could be lost, not just on the athlete side, but coach and administration. But it also speaks to why COVID-19 in an environment where sport is amateur, still recreational, it's not going to be that high on the priority going forward in the recovery phase. So how the recovery is done? Some sports, the well-established sports that have very strong financial international federation, will be better positioned than others.
Yeah. Recently, you opened a conference, an Advanced Women in Leadership conference, and you're talking about women and losing a generation of sorts. How could that conference actually galvanize women in sports and also be abroad the region itself?
Well, it was the fourth annual, so I'm known in the Olympic movement as a big advocate of gender equality. We have a program here in Trinidad and Tobago, features female, and we have made it very open that the next president of the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee should be female. I mean, Bermuda don't have that problem.
Right.
But the Bermuda situation is not reflective across the Olympic movement. Research will show that women are very much underrepresented at the decision-making and head table. So for me, it's very important in keeping awareness high and advocating and championing. And it's not only about women doing it, it's about men also, because the reality is that the Olympic movement and sport movement is very patriarchal. It is still very much an old boys club.
Yes.
And no offense, internationally, still very, not just an old boys club, it's white and male. So it's very important, because I keep telling people the importance of having diversity and inclusion at the decision-making table it's a simple reality. Someone who is not like you, I'm just saying, and not only a color thing, don't get me wrong, who have not had your experiences, can't speak to the impact of your experiences.
Right.
It's just difficult, for example, if you're white and privileged, to understand what poverty is.
Yes.
And it's not a negative, it's a reality. So you need to have the diversity around the table. So in terms of recovery from COVID-19, if you don't have women voices, then how you will understand that there are issues facing women, there are issues facing color, there are issues facing black people, there are issues related to religion, gender, LGBTQI. Listen, sport is facing so many existential challenges. It's not like how we knew it back in the days, I mean, I know I can say that without fear of contradiction. We may have come from an era and a generation where we didn't have the amount of distractions. We didn't have the amount of issues. We didn't have social media. So, it's but I don't envy sports administrators coming up now. I don't envy the young athletes. I don't even envy people we're trying to encourage to participate and stay in sports. Sports is under serious pressure.
Right. Looking at the region, when we talk about the NOCs and just how much help they are needing and asking for, what are some of the things that are priority in order for this region to survive the next 3 years?
That's the $1 million question, right? The reality is, I'm not doom and gloom. As a matter of fact, I'm an eternal optimist. But I think the Olympic movement has a plus. Just this morning, the IOC president was confirming that they will continue to support. They recognize that there are going to be significant issues in terms of debt, governments, international federations, but they are committed to supporting. I think that is going to be a real sort of safety net, so to speak, for the Olympic committees and the Olympic movement. I think that though that it places a significant responsibility, duty, and obligation on national Olympic committees, especially those in the Caribbean. And I think that many of the national Olympic committees will have to really come out of the box, because many of them are very conservative and traditional.
Yes.
In the way they run things. They focused a lot on particular sports. It is a legitimate accusation that many NOCs focus on the trees and not the forest. And I think that is where NOCs will have a serious challenge. Even in your NOC, in the various countries, you look at how the issues, and people try to hide from it. I'm known as one, I speak out and I speak open, because to me, the only way you can begin to solve a problem is if you admit you have a problem. So the first thing for us to move forward is that the mindset and attitude has to change. The National Olympic Committee have to become more open-minded, more transparent, more accountable, and more inclusive. Too many of the National Olympic Committees in the Caribbean are very narrow in terms of the sport that they support and the people and individuals that they support.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because you are so open and so vocal about your feelings when it comes to equality and the like. Earlier this year, you lobbied the IOC to rescind the life bans on Vincent Matthews and Wayne Collette. How far have you gotten with that?
Not very far. Not very far. The silence is deafening. I've gotten a lot of private support. Those who have said, "Boy, man, you're crazy," you know, but we support you, but we're not doing it publicly, because you're already under the bus already. It makes sense.
Right.
Others going under the bus. I accept that challenge and responsibility.
Now, looking at that Rule 50, why do you think they won't address it?
Because it disrupts. So let me see this. I could understand the IOCs and the Eurocentric sport and Olympic movement. I can understand their pain point, right?
Right.
You have to appreciate this thing is systemic. This is what they grew up with. This is how they've been socialized. So you asking people to change generation. Now, some of them, like all of us, there are things that trigger us that you and I, somebody might ask you, well, Earl, why you do that? It could be something handed down. And you can't give a reason why, you know, say, well, that's not my father, that's not my uncle, that's not my grandfather, my great-grandfather. It's handed down. And that's what they're facing. So what Rule 50 does, and when you go back to the history of Rule 50 in Avery Brundge's days, and he was an acknowledged racist, it was meant to suppress. That's what the word they initially used. And if you position it at a point in time in the history of the world, not just sports, with the civil rights movement, you will understand. And when you understand that sport, which is essentially European-centric, would have come from the colonial days, going back 500 years. Sport was used as a cultural tool of imperialism. So that construct for sport has not changed. And what Rule 50 does, it gives the athletes a voice. Remember, the construct of the plantation is that we don't have a voice.
Right.
That hasn't changed.
Right. Yeah. When you look at how a conversation amongst our region would go, and then I guess outside the region, how much does the people within the region understand just that challenge of knowing what the setup and what the rest of the world looks like?
Well, you have to also appreciate Bob Marley's song, mental, emotional state. We are still essentially enslaved mentally and emotionally. The comfort of massa, whether that imagery of massa has changed and been diluted a bit. If you look at the Caribbean, we're still very much reliant on somebody to solve the problem, somebody to be our savior. What we have done, we have shifted it now to politicians and the business community. And we are like baby birds in the nest with our mouth open, waiting for mama bird and papa bird to come and feed us, so that the intuitive fear of controlling our own destiny is still very much a constraint on us fulfilling our individual and collective potential. And if we look at sports, we could, I mean, Bermuda as an example, in Bermuda, they have now started, and I'm very delighted in terms of the medals that the profile that Bermuda is now getting. It may be very limited in particular, like triathlon and other things, but it doesn't mean that Bermuda don't have the potential. But the potential has a cap on it because of the societal construct.
Yes.
And Bermuda, as an example, face a unique problem which you will know, and know. Everybody from Bermuda listening this will know better than me. But Bermuda, as an example, could do so much better in my view. And, you know, I speak to that if I may. I always had a little problem with Bermuda, right? Yeah, because it went back to, so my background in sport is really rugby.
Okay.
And there was a time that Bermuda used to dominate the Caribbean rugby scene with their basically expat-oriented team. We're talking about real drop-ins, right? So, but a lot of effort had been made in recent times, both by, in this case, World Rugby and the Bermuda Rugby fraternity, to make the game more inclusive, a lot of gain. And you're seeing the results of that in especially the performances that I've kept an eye on in the under 19 level, right? But my point, the point I'm trying to make is that we collectively, throughout the reason, have to unshackle ourselves from historical antecedents. And no matter what we do externally, if we don't address the internal conflicts that we have, we will not be able to, and listen to me carefully, to seize the opportunities that there are in the crisis that is the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. Because what COVID-19 has done, it has, no pun intended, flattened the curve in the sense of, it don't matter where you're from. This COVID-19, you could be rich, you could be black, white, poor, it's getting every country. So in some aspects, the playing field is level. How now do the countries in the Caribbean build on those opportunities? And that's where it's important for us to emancipate our mentality, our mindset, and our attitude.
Right. Just prior before we go, looking at the Sports Integrity Global Alliance Council, what is the mandate for this council, and what are the aims and goals for them to kind of get out a message?
So the Sport Integrity Global Alliance is an independent body that has been put together by a number of big sponsors and stakeholders, again, in Europe, MasterCard, etc. And their focus is led by Emmanuel Medeiros. Never get the pronunciation of his name right, but he's Portuguese, a lawyer, to address integrity issues in sport. And not only good governance, but more important, because of its experience with European football, the issues of human trafficking in sport, using sport, money laundering, bribery, illegal gambling. What we don't recognize, whether because we are still very approach things from a very naive way in our region, is the power of money laundering. In other words, the criminal network and the infiltration in sport. Match fixing. We could go on. Human trafficking. You do some research in terms of the human trafficking from out of Africa and the Americas in terms of football. There are some horrendous stories of where some of these young African, young South Americans, even Caribbean, who have been sold a dream and where they end up on the streets, and it's just so SIGA, as it's called, that's their essential mandate in trying to come up with universal standards that the sport ecosystem globally will take notice of. It has been an extremely difficult challenge because, again, you know, the international sport and the Olympic movement, of which I'm a part, thrives on this notion of political neutrality and autonomy, while it does what it may feel it could do. You look at what is happening with FIFA and the Trinidad and Tobago Football Association, regardless of where you stand. And yes, FIFA has rules and statutes which must be respected. But I think if you, Earl, were in the position of the TTFA executive, United TTFA as they call, and within 4 months of your being democratically elected, a coup was staged, you would probably feel just as they do. Because when they may, and the other problem is when they sought to address it, they couldn't afford. Now, there's a basic thing which you wouldn't get into here today, but if you look at it, the concept of the rule of law, where all are supposed to be equal before the law. And therefore, if there's a situation where you, Earl Basden, I hope I got it right, that last name.
Yes.
Have a legitimate grouse, and you can't, because you can't afford to go to the courts in your land and the High Court and the Appeal Court of Privy Council, then you will have a perception of injustice.
Yes.
And we must look at these things open-mindedly and not be fazed by the big kohuno, the big boss in the room. So I say that to say that an organization like SIGA can be a legitimate authoritative check and balance if they're allowed, but everybody wants to protect their silo and their little empire in the international global sport movement, and that's understandable because even the United Nations estimated that the global sport industry is worth $756 billion US. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that there's big money for the reason that many organizations and individuals want to retain the status quo.
Looking at 2021 with the Olympics, how are you guys preparing your athletes for the games? You know, we're still unsure. Tokyo say yes. There's a lot of doubt.
It's not unsure, based on what I heard the IOC President Thomas Bach said this morning.
Okay.
He basically said that the good news is that the games will be on.
Okay.
And that he also mentioned that the information that he seems to be working, it seems that a vaccine is imminent. So he's very confident. So I can say categorically, based on what the IOC president said this morning, but I was always confident that the games will be held, because the reality is, Earl, that the Olympic movement could not afford for the games not to be held. All right, the big hole that would have been created would have created significant issues for the Olympic movement and the access to Olympic Solidarity Fund. So that having been said, the games are on. The IOC again reaffirmed this morning that they will provide the needed support for the athletes via the Olympic Tokyo 2020 scholarship. I'm quite sure in Bermuda, Judy Simmons and her team would have been addressing that. I know that it's being done across the Caribbean Association of National Olympic Committees, and here in Trinidad, we are focused a lot on it. So coming off of what happened this morning, it gives additional comfort in terms of any concerns that we may have had in terms of driving as much support as we could afford to behind the athletes preparing for, and those who have already qualified for Tokyo 2020, which has now been scheduled. So challenging time, but where there is a will, there is a way.
Okay. Well, I do want to thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy man. Early this morning on that IOC call, and now sitting here talking with me. And of course, you have a big week coming up with elections and all. So I want to thank you for your time, and I do hope that we get a chance to talk again very soon, because I know you are the one that is always challenging us to move forward in the region and to gather collectively. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and your viewers and listeners across Bermuda and across the Caribbean. So thank you very much.
Okay. Enjoy your day.
Same to you. Stay safe.